Why B2B teams suck at sales and how to fix it. Welcome back to a fresh episode of BreakingB2B.com. I'm your host, Sam Dunning. And if you want to check out our past episodes, try the weekday newsletter or apply to work with us. Head over to BreakingB2B.com. So join me today. I've got Richard Harris. Richard's the owner at the Harris Consulting Group and co-founder over at Surf and Sales. We're going to be diving into why so many B2B teams suck when it comes to selling, if it's marketing's fault, some breakdowns on how you can fix it, top mistakes we see, and what you should be doing instead. So with that, a warm welcome to the show, Richard. Welcome back. It's been 4 years since you first came on. How are we doing, sir?
I'm good. You know, the important thing is we both went into our caves for COVID, and we are now coming out of hibernation, and it's good to see you. And we were chatting before we jumped on here that, you know, we need to do a better effort of staying in touch because I miss you, Sam, and I always love our conversations, whether it's in a session like this or just offline. So glad to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, likewise, man. Looking forward to diving in. I was saying it was when we did a UK versus US sales showdown. I think it was back in 2020. My show had a different name back then. We've since rebranded, and yeah, it's way too long in the coming. But looking forward to the episode. We're going to be diving into something a bit unusual. Usually I bring on marketers, but I like to bring on sales leaders, sales experts every now and then, mainly to get a different spin on things. And also because these days, a lot of sales reps, especially BDRs, SDRs, are even having marketing leadership. So I think it's always interesting just to hear the other side of the story, let's say, hear the other side of the fence and understand what's going on with the trenches. So let's dive straight into it, Richard. You've trained tons of tech sales teams, B2B teams, and more over the years.
Yes.
Why is it that so many B2B teams still suck when it comes to selling?
Well, it has more to do, or has less to do with the actual frontline reps, whether it's BDR, SDR, XDR, whatever you call them, or the sales AEs, account managers, has a lot more to do with leadership.
Okay.
Right. It has a lot more to do with leaders not knowing how to lead emotionally and from the front. It has a lot more to do with them not knowing the best ways to coach or wanting to coach. I think a lot of leaders, particularly in sales, still see management and leadership as babysitting. And in fairness, I was one of these managers. Like, I'm not sitting here saying, well, I've been perfect all my life. I wasn't. Like, and a big reason, now, why do those leaders, I think, suck at it so much is that the leaders before us never did a good job, right? We were always sort of taught to, you know, roll up your sleeves and do the hard work and do the grit and do all those things, which is great. But rarely is a salesperson who typically gets promoted into leadership, rarely was there ever any training about soft skills, the emotional balance of your sales team, motivation. Like, motivation was, you know, carrot, stick, here's a spiff, that's it. Unrealizing that, oh, sometimes the carrot becomes the stick if the goals are out of whack. And if the goals are out of whack because executive leadership has some pie in the sky dream. So a big piece of this is that. Now, on the front lines, there is a piece of effort and attitude. You have to put in the effort and have a good attitude about it. And I don't mean like cheery, you know, Willy Wonka, I just got a golden ticket attitude. I mean, you are going to have to learn, and sometimes you're going to have to self-educate. And so for me, it has a lot to do with learning how to be more authentic. I'll shut up in a second. And how to be accountable. And so there's this lack of accountability on the revenue side from the top down on what it takes to be a good leader, right? Nobody was ever taught, you know, how to be a good leader. We were just promoted because we could hit the number. We helped out with the interviewing. Maybe we did a little onboarding. We raised our hand and said, I want to be a manager. So. You're on mute.
You'd think after 4 years I'd know how to unmute myself. Apparently not. I like it. I like how we started.
Someone sent this to me because on my podcast. Scott used to say all the time that, Richard, you're on mute.
Yeah,
Richard,
you
you're on.
think 4 years in I'd learn how to use these
Right.
tools, but apparently not. So I like that. You've taken a different spin to what I expected. So how much would you say is weighted on leadership's problem as opposed to actually the sales reps themselves taking accountability and doing some of those things you mentioned?
At least 51% is on the leadership side. I would guess it's 75% on the leadership side. It's, by the way, it's getting better, right? Like, it is getting better. I don't want to make it sound like it's terrible. It's getting better, and it tends to get better as the economy gets better, right? Like, as the economy gets better, we have more sales training and enablement and all those things and coaching. It gets worse when the economy sucks, which is kind of interesting because, I mean, Sam, in your experience and people you've talked to, how many leaders worked at a company where leadership coaching was made available? Directors of sales, VPs of sales, how to be a manager, like you bring in some outside source. I was never at one. That's not true. My last real job, we kind of had someone come in. But did anybody ever come in and teach you that? Or do you know people? Unless you were like at Oracle or Salesforce or,
Yeah, I was going to say, I've never been at large scale businesses, to be honest. Most of the time, apart from when I was in retail, and that's going back donkey's years, 12, 13 years ago, if not more, I've never been in large scale organizations.
Where did you work in retail?
That was, I don't know if you know it, it's a shop called 𝗥𝗲𝗹𝗁. So that was like a UK retail. They did cameras, videography stuff.
My very first job in high school last century, I'm a little older than you, was at the Gap selling clothes. So I have a retail affection with you. I have another connection, Sam.
So yeah, we're talking about leadership, and yeah, like you say, you're exactly right. It's not often that, I think, unless you get into real large scale organizations, that some of this training is readily available.
And the good news is that it's now readily available as the individual, right? As you're talking about this sort of breaking B2B, well, go break your own mold, right? Organizations now do have, stipends or, education funds of, $1,000 or $2,000 and those kind of things. And if I were interviewing, I would ask, like, what do you have for me to help do my own self-education? Not just what are you going to teach me? Because I think those opportunities now exist. They didn't exist for me, right? That stuff wasn't online. Like, you literally had to go to either A, a library, or B, a bookstore. And, now you can actually find it in podcasts, and you can find it in all these other places, and courses and online and stuff. So it's a whole lot better than it used to be. And there's better opportunity than it used to be.
Got it. So I think what would be quite fun is, before I start taking a dig at marketing, and I take all kinds of stances on this show. Sometimes I'll have a go at sales. Sometimes I'll have a go at marketing. We'll dive into whether it's marketing's fault for providing bad leads in a minute. But before we get to that, if you're up for it, Richard, I'd like to share perhaps the top 3 mistakes that you see from sales leadership and how we can resolve them.
Yeah.
And then the top 3 from sales reps themselves and how we can resolve those. So if we start with leadership, would you say, go with number 1 first, what would you say is the juiciest, most painful mistake?
I'll start at the highest level, right? Literally at the VC and founder level. I work in a lot of Saas and startups, so that's where my context is coming from. It's unrealistic goal setting, right? And so and there's a balance between goal setting, making it a stretch, making it attainable, and greed, right? And I don't mean greed in a bad way, not that greed is good, like the movie. More that everybody wants their money back, and that's fair. And you're asking sales reps to, make you millionaires and billionaires, but then you're beating them up when it doesn't happen. Right. So that's the first mistake, is there's this massive misalignment, where I think we can get better. I understand where it comes from in terms of, if you've got a VC and you've got Series A and your expectations and those kind of things. So that's the first thing. If I take it down one level from that, it's this belief system that only a couple of people should hit their goal. It's like only a couple of people should hit their goal. Everybody who doesn't will stay because they still want to hit their goal. It's like, no, I'd much rather have a team I'd rather have 70 to 80% of my team hit their goal and have a way better attitude and energy and not have to worry so hard about recruiting, then only have 20% hit the goal. And then I have to worry about retention and replacement. So those are sort of at the executive level that I think are big mistakes. And I think the third is an unwillingness to understand that training is a long tail solution and it's not one and done, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'll promote myself for 1 second. Like, in my training, it's not, I don't show up and throw up and train. I have a 4-week training and reinforcement. There's reinforcement sessions. And I think that I'll blame a lot of the sales trainers on, that they don't build their program that way, which for me is good. So everybody who's a sales trainer, just skip that part. So I feel like there's that piece. And then the leaders don't do enough coaching. And then the reps, here's an interesting thought, and then I'll shut up again. Sales is supposed to be the biggest instigator of change with our customers. Yet salespeople, the front line and the managers and leaders, are the hardest to make their own changes. I can come in and train, and I always know there's a couple of nuggets people walk away, and I know they do. But if they aren't willing to stick with it, well, then where's the accountability there? So that's a big piece of it. We are instigators of change, but we won't change ourselves even when we know we can be better.
So true. So true. Let's dive into those 3 for leadership. So we've got unrealistic goal setting, believing that only a couple of our reps will actually hit or should actually hit those targets that we've set, and then unwillingness to realize that training itself is not a one and done, but a long-term, ongoing skill set thing you should be investing in. So let's go unrealistic goal setting. What is your advice? So you're exactly right, and I get it. Like, these big SaaS companies, these big tech companies that have got tons of funding, they're probably under a ton of pressure from VCs to hit certain goals. So then they feel that they've got to go for those certain goals. And you said some of it could be greed, some of it just could be mad ambitiousness. And there's obviously nothing wrong with being ambitious, but in practical senses, how have you recommended teams to set goals? Like, what is your advice when it comes to saying, look, this year, this quarter, this is what we want to do?
It's a great question. So, you have to ask, the founders and the VPs, like, where's this number coming from? And doing some research on a little bit about, well, what's the expectation? Where's that expectation? And why is that the expectation? Right. So that's the first thing. The other thing is, how do you set the revenue and the targets? I see it all the time, is that everybody wants to ramp and onboard, and then they expect every rep to make 100% of the quota, like when you build out the quota plan. And that's not realistic. And then I will say, well, how many people actually do that? And if it's an early stage company, they don't even know, right? There's no track record, there's no history to it. They're just guessing. I'm like, okay, well, you're going to have a problem in a year, and you're going to have wasted all this time. So that's one. So again, finding that balance and sort of, you kind of have to like whiteboard it a little bit. Well, okay, if this is the goal and you expect everybody to hit 100%, how realistic do you think it is? Right. And you have to have this epiphany moment. Now, the founder or the VP or the executives might say, well, I don't really have a choice. That's what was dictated. It's like, okay, well, then let's put a plan together to show why that's unrealistic. And put a plan together that says, well, if this is what you want me to do, here's how it's going to look. Here's what I think it should be. Thank you, leaders. And we already know what's going to get chosen. I'm just trying to set that VP of sales up so that in 18 months, when they have that, stupid conversation, that's the thing. It's like, well, I told you, like, why am I getting fired for being right? Because, me, I'll hug them out the door. So I think that's a piece of it. And I think that's that last piece of, you do realize that the average tenure is this, and the average tenure is because this is what happens every single time, right? And what happens when you lose that VP of sales is the next one comes in, and the founder finally realizes that they made the mistake on the first one, so the second one gets a better shot. That doesn't work, and then it's the third one who finally figures it out. Meanwhile, if they'd been listening all along, that's a piece of it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And Have you ever worked with, so that's kind of looking at it from a, I guess, either established, a sizable organization or a company that's got some serious funding. Have you ever looked at it, perhaps even with your own business or working with smaller companies, on how
Well,
they
it's the
should?
same. Yeah, so it's the same thing. Like a big company, if they're asking me to come in, well, I'm like, well, what are the mistakes you've made? Like, why am I even here? What's happening?
Hmm.
Oh, we didn't hit numbers. We didn't hit numbers. Okay, well, where did those come from? How did you get to that point? Because I'm going to give you some advice that you may or may not like. And if you're going to choose to ignore it, that's on you, right? That's okay. So I do this at both big and small companies. It's the exact same conversation. Contextually, it might change a little bit in the sense of like, okay, it's a small company. You're a first-time founder. Here's what we need to express to the board. Here's what expectations should look like. Okay, you're afraid to go to the board. Fine, we'll build it out this way, but don't be surprised in a few months if this happens, right? Whatever the if might be. So the conversation's the same every place I go. Now, at the bigger companies, they often have a historical track record, right? This is probably the best way to describe it, Sam. Forecasting will never, ever be accurate. Forecasting should always get better. That's the key piece, right? And if you think about, public companies, right? Like, so here in the States, it's earnings season. All the companies are announcing their earnings. They've got macroeconomics and like really, really smart people who study this stuff and run, all kinds of data analytics to determine this stuff. Well, the rest of us are like licking our finger and, which way's the wind blowing? Here's a dartboard. Like, I think we can do this, right? So, your forecast needs to be looked at as a measure, not an exact. Right? That's my opinion anyway. So,
Okay, let's move on to point 2, which is, we've kind of touched on a bit with one, believing only a couple of our sales team should hit their goal. What do we mean by that? Is that just being wildly safe and conservative, or is it something else?
I think it's one of these copycat leagues. Well, that's the way it's always been done.
Right.
Right. Why do again, and I don't mean to pick on the VCs, because let's face it, without VCs, there would not be a lot of jobs that exist. So grateful for that, is that they're driving things, I think, at a certain numbers level. And there's some amazing VCs out there that I know, Landis is a really good one I like at Emergence, and Bessemer I like, and Michael over out of New York. There's another guy, but there's tons of great VCs out there who understand this balance and communication between what their VCs want and how to handle the startup. I think it's a copycat league. It's the way it's always been done before. And we're not looking at the evidence of, gosh, the average sales leader's there only 16 to 18 months. Well, what should we be doing differently with that sales leader so that they stay 24? And not so much that the leader leaves, but that we're setting unrealistic expectations upon that leader, right? Like, start to have this, we're the biggest instigators of change, but we won't change ourselves. There's a book that I've read, Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene, who also did 48 Laws of Power, both great books. And he talks about humans being massively irrational, and we will take irrational thoughts and rationalize them, which I see a lot in this goal setting thing. Well, it's irrational to think that someone's going to last more than 16 months when we have evidence that it doesn't, but we rationalize that they will last longer. It's irrational to think the team should do it because the whole team should make more goal, but they rationalize that they should do it this way. So that's where I think it's coming from in a lot of ways. But and again, it's like, you're not thinking ahead in terms of like, okay, well, what's my cost of retention or replacement, right? What's the cost of having can I curse on here?
Sure.
We're on LinkedIn Live, so having a unhappy culture, let's call it that. And they don't realize these things. They just see us as bots, right? That's why I know we're not going to get into it, but that's why I'm so excited to see all these companies race to the bot of sales and see that that's not going to work either, because that will only work in a business B2C world, like Amazon, and it's not going to change until the buyer changes their attitude, right? And the quick version is, look, I'll go and spend $3,000 on a TV on Amazon easily, right? I don't know how that translates over to the pound, but and I might even go spend 80 grand on a car, but I'm sure as heck not going to spend 80 grand on a software initiative where it's my solution only and it's going to affect 4 other departments without talking to a human. Bots aren't going to solve that problem anytime soon.
No, I think we're agreed there. I think we're agreed. And then let's push to the last point before we shift to sales reps' perspective on their biggest mistakes and what they need to fix. The last point, number 3, you mentioned was unwillingness to realize that training your sales team is not a one and done, but an ongoing effort. How do you shift that mindset? And like, what's the cure here?
Well, I think so. That's part of what I do, is that part of my reinforcement sessions are that I do some reinforcement with the managers and the team after training, because I want the managers to know how to reinforce. The cool thing is, I think from the bottom up, the reps are getting better at this, right? We've got the gongs of the world and the courses of the world and all those things. And I think reps are self-educating more than they ever did. I mentioned that earlier. So I think that's a tremendously great thing about the role. We don't have to sit around and wait. And I also think that the one thing leaders are getting right and companies are getting right is, like, let's give, Sam a stipend of $1,000 or $1,500 a year. So if Sam wants to take a course, he can, right? So I think that's a big piece of it. So I don't know if I answered the question as, negatively as you wanted me to, but that's, it's better than it used to be.
Sounds like things are getting better. Are there any... Is it one of those things where you believe that sales leaders have got to experience the pain, in the sense that they've got to maybe do a big payout, let's say for a sales kickoff? So they get one of the well-known sales trainers, whoever it is, they pay a boatload of cash and they think, excellent, this quarter we're going to hit our targets now because we've had this sales kickoff and we've invested a ton. And then they realize our sales team were buzzing for a few days and super hyped for a couple of days after, but we need to constantly be doing this training. We need to reinforce, this is how you run discovery, this is how you run demos, this is follow-up, this is customer success, whatever is involved. And then realizing that one and dones just aren't the cure to consistent sales results.
So for me, I always say this, sales kickoffs are some of the worst times to ever do sales training in the way that it's been traditionally done, where, someone like me comes in and does a training, all day. And you nailed it. It's like, okay, at this sales kickoff, let's do a training for 2 hours just on better discovery. Like, literally, what are the questions we should be asking around need or economic impact or access to authority or timeline? Or let's do a 2-hour session on how to run a better demo. Like, that's it. Like, to try and do this whole thing, I think is a massive waste of time and resource, because it's just too much, right? At a traditional sales kickoff, this isn't my line, but I've repeated it, is that, the brain will only absorb as much as the butt will tolerate, right? And if you're trying to cram all this stuff in the head of these sales reps and expect them to memorize it all, it's terrible. What executives forget is that by the time the kickoff happens, they've seen the deck 4 or 5 times. They've read through it. They've done it. They've built it. They get it. It's been ingrained. They've studied it. The reps are seeing it the first time, right? So, so I'm not a fan of a massive training. I'm a fan of finding a snippet, finding one thing that you want them to get better at and do that, right? Like it's in terms of, European football, right? Like the real football, you practice the corner kick from the right side over and over and over again, not the left side, not the right side. Now, you don't try and do it all at once, right? You do one thing at a time. So everybody memorizes their position, their spot, where to move. And then you try to put the ball in play, because, it all lines up a certain way till the ball's kicked. right? Once the ball is kicked, everything changes.
So true. And this is spoken from a terrible footballer. Even though I play about 3 days a week, I'm still god awful. But I think
Well,
what you're trying to
you're a better footballer than I am a soccer player. So, there you go.
And I think what you're trying to get at is am I right in saying it's not broken down enough? So we're
Yes,
trying to cram too much into a single session rather than
correct.
break whatever it's down, whether it's cold outreach,
Right.
whether it's discovery, whether it's running demos, whatever,
Right.
into small bite-sized pieces that are then ongoing throughout the year. Instead, we think, let's just ram all this at our reps in a few hours and hope some of it sinks in and gets taken away.
Right.
Gotcha. Cool, man. All right, so that's the 3 leadership mistakes. Let's push on to sales reps themselves, be it A's, be it SDRs, wherever you want to take it, as practical as you wish. What would you say if you had to condense it into 3 of the juiciest, most frustrating, and easily fixable mistakes? What is it going to be on a sales rep's frontier?
So I think, and I'll speak to the SDR, BDR world. One of the biggest mistakes I think happens is that when an SDR or BDR, and I did this too, so I'm not above, above everyone. If I set a meeting that day, I'd go take a break. I'd be like, take a break. I call it Cadillacing around the bases, and in bases I mean baseball, right? Which in your part of the world might be called stickball. I don't know if you understand the game, but they sort of saunter around like they just did everything, and it's kind of like you're losing so much momentum.
Right.
Try not to do that. Right. Stay on the phones, keep your sequence or cadence going, get back on email, and kind of like, all right, who's next? Who's next? Who's next? And go for that second one. Right. Particularly if it's early in the day. Like if you're one of those SDR BDRs and you set something up in the morning before lunch, it's like, I want to go for 2 today. Right. So that's the first mistake I think people make. The second is they try to change things every time. Right. It's kind of like one of those things where, actually, let me step back. It's not realizing why they got in their slump is a mistake. I guarantee you, if, I don't know what something happened. Why am I all of a sudden not setting any meetings? Like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I was setting a meeting a week or 2 meetings a week. And if I sit down and talk to them, I'll be like, okay, what changed? Oh, nothing changed. I'm like, okay, well, let's go listen to one of your calls now that we can listen and you hear it. Let's go listen to one of your better ones. And I'm like, oh, do you see how you cut this part out and this part out from the ones a couple of weeks ago? And they'll go, oh yeah. And I'll say, well, why did you do that? No, I was getting bored. I was tired of it. I'm like, dude, it's working. Why would you change something? So they change something, or they'll say, oh, I was given this suggestion, so I changed something. Okay. And they forget that what was successful. So that's the first mistake. The second mistake is they will change too often. So our friend Scott Leese taught me this a long time ago, which was you don't ever make a change in the way you say something until you've accomplished it once that day. So if I'm setting meetings and I want to try a new script, if I'm a BDR, okay, I'm not allowed to change my script until I set a meeting that same day earlier. Because if I haven't set one, so again, I've got that momentum, I've got that energy, there's a little less pressure, so I can try something different. If I try something different and I haven't set one that day, all of a sudden by the end of the day, I'm stressing out. I'm freaking out because I haven't hit this number. So set yourself up for success before you just make a change for the sake of change.
Got it. Okay. So let me just check I've got those 3 right. And for audience, so is the first one not taking breaks after a win? So correct. For example, you set a meeting, I don't know, you set up a follow-up, whatever that is, right? And then not thinking, oh great, I've nailed this, I'm gonna, I don't know, go out for a walk or grab a coffee, whatever it may be. When you're on a roll, you're on a roll,
right?
Is there like a psychological thing behind that, or is that just something that you've seen from doing this so long? Or
I think it's a little bit of everything, right? Like I can't tell if it's egocentric because salespeople are like, yes, and I think sometimes we do need a break. I get it. If it's been a long week, or maybe it's your first meeting that you've set, or it's your first demo, or finally someone said yes to the contract. So I want to make sure people know that I'm not talking about SDRs doing this. AEs do it. Everybody does it. I think it's a relief. It's a way to sort of let some pressure off, and that's healthy, good, mentally healthy. That's good. I think the challenge just is that you're just missing an opportunity, right? Like, I think, again, when you score a goal in football, your best player doesn't want to come off the court, off the pitch, just because they scored a goal. They want to go back out and do it again, right? They've got all this energy, right? Now they take a breath and they calm and they settle and they ground themselves. And then I think they go and do it again. And I think that's the difference. I don't know why, though. I'm not a psychologist as much as I might like to think I am.
I think it makes sense. I think it's like, if you've got the momentum, it's almost like us as humans, we love to procrastinate. I certainly do.
Yes.
So if I've got a bunch of tasks, I know I'm always good. Even if I know that, especially now since I've moved over and renamed the podcast, started my own agency, Breaking B2B. And I know that each day I'll make a list of the task, and I'll always think I've got to prioritize the one that's going to drive revenue, whether that's, I don't know, doing my first off, doing a post about a tip around what we do, SEO, websites, etc. on LinkedIn. Then I've got to do these follow-up calls with, I don't know, prospects that are in sales conversations with. Then I've got to do another sales activity. But then I'll think in my head, yeah, I've got to do some of these tasks that are going to be a bit tricky and take some time, but I'd much rather mess around with a podcast, or I'd much rather apply to be on someone else's marketing podcast. It's like your head starts playing tricks on you. And it's much the same with sales, right? You think, oh, I've got the win, I've got the meeting, I'm now going to procrastinate. I'll grab a coffee and I can do that tomorrow, and I can push that back. And
it's kind of the thing of like, I know better. I know I shouldn't do that, but I'm gonna. And it goes back to what I said earlier of like, we're irrational people, but we rationalize irrational thoughts, right? Yeah. Like we rationalize, oh, I should go do this instead, and we avoid hard work.
Oh yeah, like the plague, like the plague. Even when I've got my to-do list for the day, I'll still mess around and get to nearly 4 or 5 o'clock and wonder where the hell the day went. So working on that each day. Cool. That's point one. Point two was not taking a step back and realizing what caused a slump.
Yep.
For anyone that's tuning in that's not familiar with a slump as well, walk us through, Richard, what that actually means and then how you can fix it.
Yeah. So a slump is, that moment when things aren't going well, right? Like you were doing great, you were doing fine, and all of a sudden something's not working anymore, right? You're not setting as many demos, or your deals aren't moving through the pipeline after your demos like they used to, or your discovery calls aren't moving to demos, whatever it is, or you're not setting meetings. That's a slump. So we have to figure out, how did I get into that slump? What did I change? Did I change anything? And so often, again, we don't want to believe we changed anything. And in fact, we did. And when we go back and look for it and listen for it, we're like, oh, that's what I did. And so many times, I won't say all the time, it's, I got bored, so I wanted to sound different. I thought this would sound better. And then you realize it didn't sound better, but you kept doing it anyway. So, I did this once. I had this slump. This is when I first started, and I was doing my discovery, and, people would ask me, well, what do you do? And I would say, well, I teach reps how to earn the right to ask questions, which questions to ask, and when. And I thought that was a mouthful. So I tried to be funny, and I changed it. And I said, I try to teach reps how to stop saying stupid shit. And that's funny in a bar. That's not appropriate in a business meeting, right? And I went back and changed it. And all of a sudden I was out of my slump, right? But it took me a while to realize, like what is going on? Why is my business, why am I not moving stuff forward? So it happens to everybody.
Do you think that often what I hear a lot is not just in sales, in marketing too, business in general, that it's a common saying that a full pipeline cures I think it's all ilks or all ills.
Right.
So basically
Right.
the saying is, as long as you're constantly filling the pipeline, so if you're a sales rep, that might be cold calling, cold
Mm-hmm.
email, warm referrals, whatever, however you fill your funnel, social selling, whatever. As a marketer, that's going to be whatever your task, whether that's running ads, SEO, demand
Mm-hmm.
gen, trade shows, whatever your department is. Is that right? Or is there a lot more to it? Like you said there, actually understanding what's causing issues and taking a step
Yeah,
back, reviewing what changed.
it's not wrong, right? Like a full pipeline does, unless it's crappy pipeline, right? If it's crappy pipeline, that's not good. And so again, I think we've created this belief that 3x the pipeline is what we need. Like, really, do you think you close? Where did that come from? Well, I don't know, that's what everybody says. Like, well, what if it was 7x? Okay. What if it was 2x, but it was way better? So this is what I tell everybody to do is, if you've got any deal in your pipeline that's 2x the average sales cycle, then you have to kill it, because so many reps are leaving things in their pipeline as a reminder and a tickler. What it's really doing is reminding you of all the bad stuff. It's creating a negative energy when you look at it. You're just like having a closet full of nothing to wear, right? I got 25 deals in the pipeline. Only 2 are really any good. Well, why don't you kill the other ones? Oh, I don't want to do that. My pipeline will look empty. My executive team's going to look bad, at me. And I'm going to be like, yeah, but it's the truth. This goes back to that forecasting thing. This is why forecasting is so bad, is that we allow too much stuff in there that shouldn't be in the pipeline in the first place. So, the important piece to do, and I say this, no matter what sales trainer you ever hire, you look at your pipeline and you take a snapshot of it the day before they show up, and you start measuring and get that against what happens after that person shows up and the training's instigated. And you start looking at the new deals. Are the new deals better qualified? There might be fewer of them, but that's okay because they're more realistic. And that's what everybody wants in the first place. So there's a lot of gamesmanship around this whole pipeline creation and how much pipeline. So yes, it does. A full pipeline does not cure all wills, right? Or all ills. You know what does? Hitting revenue targets. So it's not about, yes, you need a pipeline, but you got to hit the numbers with good deals.
I guess it's a combination of things. As always, there's never one clear answer, but I suppose it's being stricter with what you enter into your pipeline.
And so, sorry, go ahead.
And what you qualify out.
Yeah, so I call it, like, if you don't have strong exit criteria from one stage to the next, meaning these are the very specific activities that need to have occurred in order for us to move it from stage 1 to stage 2 or 2 to 3 or whatever, then that's where your pipeline fails, right? That's a place, because you're not defining it well. And by the way, demo is not a pipeline stage. Demo is an activity within a particular pipeline stage. So the exit criteria are, was the demo scheduled? Was the demo complete? Not demo stage, not proposal stage. Those are terrible stage names, but that's a whole other tangent. So
do you have, this might be quite useful actually, especially for marketers tuning in that are working with their sales team and perhaps getting frustrated with sales reps when the marketers then go to look at the sales reps pipeline and see certain things marked, i.e., like you said there, perhaps discovery call ran, or demo sat, or pushing to sign proposal, or pushing to sign agreement. Is there this is a generic question, and I appreciate there's going to be a lot of nuance to it. But when it comes to actually setting realistic stages in putting pipeline through, is there a framework you should follow, or are there any recommendations that you can give?
Oh, absolutely. So starting at the highest level in marketing, you have a suspect, someone you think could be the right person. You would then have a prospect when you realize that they probably are. You then move into qualifying stage. Then you move into discovery stage. Then you move into selection stage. Then you move into negotiation stage. And then you move into closing. And so within that, there are certain things that must occur, right? So, access to authority, not necessarily stage 1. Like, you don't need to know who the decision maker is in your first meeting. That's the dumbest thing in the world to try and figure out. The most important thing is, do they have a pain, and how painful is it for them? Do they have a headache or a migraine? So understanding that did you discuss the very specific pains and targets, and were you able to drive to some economic impact in qualification and discovery? That's more important than all the other stuff, right? It needs to be more customer centric, for lack of a better phrase, right? There's no such thing. This is the part marketing is going to hate. So let's do that. There's no such thing as a buyer's journey. It does not exist. There does not exist. All that exists is a buyer's experience. There's a seller's journey that's created by sales and marketing, but there's not a buyer's journey.
Why is there not a
There's
buyer's
just
journey?
a seller. Because that a buyer's journey means that they're on this path to go do something because they want to. No, they're looking for an experience. Sam, how many apps do you have on your phone?
I don't know,
100?
50 odd. Yeah, getting
50,
towards
okay.
that, I expect.
Yeah. How many are more on there, but you haven't deleted it, but it's because you have a bad experience?
There's all sorts. There's plenty.
Right. So the only part of the journey might be, I'm curious. However, so I'm going to go look for an app. However, before you did that, you had an experience that says, I want to solve this problem. So there's a buyer's experience that you're going through. And that's the part that matters. There's a seller's journey. That's the process. That's the stages. And I build it off of the experience I want them to have. Right? How many websites have you landed on and you're like, this is a shitty website, I'm out of here? Okay.
Yeah, man, all the time.
So that's what I mean. There's no buyer's journey. It's only instigated by an experience.
I like your spin on that, because I mean, I suppose it's something that's talked about a fair bit when I look at kind of B2B marketers chatting various things on LinkedIn and where have you. And you're right. I mean, I think as marketers, sometimes we're guilty of falling into traps and thinking that if we run certain campaigns, then our prospects are going to follow it. Whether that is, I don't know, LinkedIn ads to a lead magnet to nurture campaign, whether that is via emails or via ads to then eventually requesting a demo to then going for a flow. And the truth is, like, B2B is so complex, and especially when you get into larger scale deals, people just don't do what you want them to do. And the way that people buy, especially in B2B, and as the sale becomes more complex in software and service-based higher ticket deals, you can't control what your prospects are going to do, what your potential customers are going to do. Like you said, experience is a good way of putting it.
Yeah. And so if you take that approach, you can lead them. You cannot control them. So here's how I define the difference, right? Is that don't talk about what you do, talk about the pain you solve, right? So I'll give you, and this is the challenge I see between sales and marketing, right? Sales needs to talk about the pains. Marketing likes to talk about what you do. So my example is, I used to say, and I'm a sales trainer and I've trained companies like Zoom and Salesforce and whatever. It's like, blah, who cares, right? So does everybody else. But if I say, I teach reps how to earn the right to ask questions, which questions to ask and when, there's not a sales leader or marketing leader who doesn't understand exactly what that is. And in most cases, they can go, yeah, I know 3 people on our team who could get better at that. So talk about the pain you solve in the context of your customer, right? In a way that paints a picture of pain, that tells a story, not what you do, right?
It's very specific as well, isn't it? It's very relatable what you've defined there. Although it's only a sentence, it's very crisp. It's to the point, and it's something that you can always, like you say, imagine it in your head.
Yep. That's a big piece of a good sales trainer will teach your team how to do that.
But I think a lot of people in general could learn something from that for the way that they describe their business or their tagline, or like you mentioned, the problem that they fix. Being able to clearly and succinctly say what you do, but in a sentence that shares the problem that you fix at the same time it sounds easy, but it's very, very difficult.
Yeah. That's the goal. And it's kind of like saying everybody's talking to you because they got a headache. It's our job as salespeople to make them realize they actually have a migraine.
Cool, man. I think we did two of the issues with sales. I think we
Yeah.
touched on the third one, which I believe was changing too often with processes. Was that right? Or
Yeah. Yeah. It was the process. And then it was like, how do I articulate it? Might be the third one. How do I
right,
articulate what we're doing?
gotcha. Being able to, and have we covered that already in terms of kind of clearly defining kind of the offer or the problem you fix, or is there more
Yeah.
to go into there?
Yeah. Yeah. Don't ask me if we did 2 or 3. I'm in sales. I have the memory of a goldfish. So,
Oh, dude, same here. Same here. Yeah, I like the way this conversation's gone. We've covered some useful angles, and I believe it's going to be useful for marketing teams, especially ones that are probably working closely with sales and probably looking at a pipeline and probably wondering kind of why aren't these deals progressing as
Yeah.
fast as they should be? Like, is it sales fault? And hopefully that gives another side of the coin, which I like to do on this show quite a lot. But just to take one dig at marketing, I'm a marketer myself, so I can get away with it. How often of the time is it marketing's fault for sending quote unquote bad leads to sales?
Well, I mean, if they're truly bad leads, then that's marketing's fault. I think the real question is like, what's the relationship like between sales and marketing to figure this out, right?
Mm,
And sales. If your head of sales sits around and blames marketing but doesn't sit down to talk to marketing, then that's not marketing's fault. If your head of sales wants to sit down with marketing, but marketing wants to discount or disbelieve what the salesperson's saying, then that's marketing's fault. So I think there's a communication gap that happens there, which is also one of the reasons I think the CRO, the Chief Revenue Officer, has evolved in the last 3 or 4 years, right? That, when you and I started, that didn't really even exist. We were like, what's that? And so now there's someone who can be the judge of sales and marketing and find the right answer. So that's the good news. If marketing is truly sending bad leads, yes. What's interesting is if you look at the average tenure of a marketer versus the average tenure of a sales leader, it's ridiculously low. I want to say the last time I looked, the average tenure of a marketer was like 2.5 years. Meanwhile, a sales leader was 16 or 18 months. So that doesn't mean the marketer's getting it right, because the sales leader was getting fired for not hitting the goal. So that's part of it. The other piece I will say is, and you tell me if this is happening, marketing actually needs to own the number. They actually have to generate a revenue target, and that scares the heck out of marketers. Well, I can't control that. And it's like, well, then the salespeople can't control the quality of the lead. Like, no, marketing, you have to own a piece of the number. A percentage of revenue has to come from you. Now, where that falls apart is that everybody wants single attribution to the deal, and that's not appropriate.
mm,
And that's an executive stupid decision. Oh, only marketing or only sales can get paid, because God forbid we maybe overcompensate a smidge, right? It's like, really, like if there are a percentage of deals that get double dinged for compensation, and you're going to go out of business because of that, then you got a way bigger problem than sales and marketing. So this sole attribution of either sales or either marketing is just stupid. Now, there could be a rule of, look, if marketing hasn't touched them in 18 months, okay, then it can't be. But even then, if the salesperson's using content and collateral from marketing, well, then why doesn't marketing get credit for that? Like, that's so stupid to me. So
mm.
I think it's a built-in problem as much as it is someone's fault, so to speak, at the marketing side. So I'm being pretty nice to marketing, I think, Sam.
I think so. I think I'm harsh on marketers all the time, and I do B2B marketing, right? Like,
Right.
I often think that I do agree. I think B2B marketers should be held accountable to revenue numbers, and I think that a lot of marketers, in my opinion, have it too easy. And I believe that they should get out there on the front lines, because
Yep.
having sold and having marketed, selling is way bloody tougher, in my honest opinion. Because a lot of the time, marketers can hide behind certain things and blame sales. And once you get in the cold front line of doing things like cold calling, dealing with objections face on, you'll realize that your life as a marketer is so much easier. And
But
if you
go ahead.
Yeah. And I was going to say, if marketers just took one day out to kind of realize that some of the shit that salespeople deal with, then they'd have a lot more sympathy, and they'd
Yeah.
realize, well, how can we support these folks? Like, Like you said, I mean, we talk about this stuff on the show all the time, like working with your sales team to understand like the top 5 objections, top 3 to 5 juicy bleeding neck problems you fix, how you can leverage that in the media, the content, the ads you put out. So you can work together, but you can both be held accountable, especially when it comes to larger deal cycles, because it's not just sales that are accountable. Marketing's going to be influencing this pipeline as it goes. So without taking too much of a tangent, I definitely agree with that point wholeheartedly, as regular listeners of the show will know.
So this is a suggestion too. And I love that you said, marketers should get on the front line and make some cold calls and stuff like that. And if there's any marketers who want to know, well, I don't know how to do it, I'll send you a script. It's pretty simple. Someone picks up the phone, you just say, oh, wow, someone picked up the phone. Oh my God, Sam, someone picked up the phone. You just made my day. Look, if you don't like what I have to say, you can just hang up on me. Is that okay? There you go. That's your script marketing. Now, what I will say, by the way, this goes back to all the way back to the leadership stuff, is the best advice I give all sales leaders, and it falls with this marketing leaders, is have a sales leader run a discovery call, record it, and send it to the team and tell the team to break it down. Tell me what I missed. If my VP of sales did that and was that vulnerable, wow, what would that do to my culture? Right. So I think that's a huge, huge thing that people should pay attention to in terms of like, how do I motivate without having to, use a carrot or stick? You're right. Put yourself in there. Have a CEO do the same thing. Right. So that's how I encourage people to look at this.
I like it. And I'm sure a lot of marketers are going to have opinions on this. So I look forward to seeing those, whether that is in the comments, or feel free to email me, sam@samdunning.org, or drop either myself or Richard a message on LinkedIn. We openly accept the feedback. So with that, Richard, really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for joining me. We'll have to do it more frequently than 4 years next time.
Yes.
Please do tell us more about how everyone tuning in can learn from you. Please tell us more about the new book and anything you want to share.
Yeah. So my book is coming out. It's called The Seller's Journey. In case for those who are watching, you didn't see it in the background with my lovely display. And it is a practical and tactical approach to selling. It has a ton of sales tips, like how to negotiate with procurement, and how to stop giving discounts, and how to use and versus but. So there's a ton of tactics in there, as well as some mindset stuff. So I appreciate it. You can find it at sellersjourney.co. And I'm Crazy Sam, +1 415 596 9149 415 596 9149. Yeah, that's my real cell phone number. It's the one that Sam and I can text on. Yes, I'm on WhatsApp. So I'm always here to answer a question, support people, do what I can. You might want to text me first. Just say, hey, I heard you on Sam's podcast. Can I chat with you? So I will gladly take phone calls. And of course, you can find me on LinkedIn, Richard Harris, and I'm the one with a little trademark symbol by my name to be goofy.
I think you're the first person to share their cell phone number on the show. So
I'm the only person who ever does it. I'm the only person, and rarely do people ever call me. It's like we're in sales and people don't call me, and I give out my phone number. My phone number's in my LinkedIn profile. You know what I get? A lot of terrible in-mails.
Don't we all?
It's not from a lack of effort for me to make it easy. So
good man. We're going to put the links to your book and all those resources below in the show notes. Thank you once again, Richard. Really enjoyed the chat. And yeah, thanks to you. Thanks to everyone for watching, tune in today. We've got to give a quick shout out to the show sponsors, RevenueHero and Factors.ai. And if you want to check out past episodes, check out the daily newsletter or apply to work with us on your B2B marketing. Head over to breakingb2b.com and we'll catch you soon.